Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic: British people of Reddit, how is the American Revolution taught in your schools? It's not taught at all. To be fair, you guys would be teaching dozens of different revolutions if you had to cover all of them. There's a reason so many countries have Independence Days. We learn about a lot of revolutions. French, ours, all sorts of ones that ended in dictators, etc. Edit, I'm an American, I was merely pointing out that we talk about a lot of revolutions in school. I have no idea what the UK teaches. I only ever learned about it to add context to the French Revolution in 6th form. It actually came up in our A-levels and no one could answer the question because we had no idea what happened. People who did history in my school had no idea what happened either, and our teachers were meant to actually cover it. Haha, my history teacher was a supreme racist and focused on our culture to the extent of telling other students not to sit next to white people. Glad I didn't listen to a word that shithead had to say. I failed history. We didn't want to pay taxes, so we took your tea and threw it in the harbor. The end. Edit, /. No, not the tea. No wonder we went to war over it. Yeah, me too, and by the time you get to A-levels most people aren't studying history anymore. Yeah, my school, in South Asia, not in the UK or Europe, but following CIE curriculum from 8th-9th grade onwards, only did history up to 7th grade. We did learn about the American Revolution, but if I'm remembering correctly it got about the same level of attention as the French Revolution, and then the Napoleonic Wars, and then the Russian Revolution. It's not part of the national curriculum. IRC we had a small mention of it in the context of discussing the cotton trade, but that was about it. Honestly, we talked about the American Civil War in relation to cotton more than the Revolutionary War, but that might be because I am from Manchester. My understanding is that the American Civil War is what pushed GB to start harvesting cotton in India and Egypt, since the American supply was cut off. In fact, the Confederacy was hoping that GB would help them fight the Union, claiming cotton was an important enough resource for them to protect. Didn't work out the way they hoped though. Nothing. We did lots of Roman / Anglo-Saxon / Viking / Norman stuff, then straight to the World Wars. I think, as someone else has said, it's lyric about things near your school that you can get to on a school trip. Arjavik Viking Center in York. My most overriding memory of the Javik Center is the most musty smell on earth. Edit, thanks for the gold. My first is about the smell of a Viking museum. It wasn't. History lessons I remember were World War I and II, the Battle of Hastings, the Victorians and the Tudors. Edit, people keep asking about all manner of different historical topics. I honestly can't remember other than a couple of things people have jogged my memory on. I wasn't interested in history at school, so my memory and knowledge is limited. I'm in Scotland, so replace Hastings with Stirling / Bay Okba. Don't say Tudor, but always relate it to how they are connected to Mary Queen of Scots. Add in the Jacobites. It's usually covered briefly under the chapter covering the Georgians. We don't learn about the War of 1812 either. The War of 1812 is a footnote even in America. Really? I was taught it was America, proving that it wasn't just a flash in the pan, that it wasn't going to relapse and become a colony again. Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans and its role in creating his political persona was also a big deal, never mind that the battle was superfluous. I'm not from the UK, I'm from Thailand, then Siam. During the US Civil War, our king, Rama IV, offered Abraham Lincoln a few war elephants to fight the Confederates. However, the offer was declined. That made me laugh. I can't imagine US history with war elephants being involved. They did experiment with camels at some point. Cersei Lannister could have used you as an ally. She really wanted those elephants. It isn't. To you it was the most important event in history, but to us it was Tuesday, a sideshow to the Everdig Wars with France. Wasn't it part of the never-ending war with France? I mean, we sent Lafayette there for a reason, and it wasn't because we wanted him to put on some weight. The French certainly didn't help the Americans out of the goodness of their hearts. They did it to hurt Britain. Even Napoleon, when he sold Louisiana, knew it would eventually make the United States a superpower, but one that would rival Britain on the seas without threatening French domination of Europe. They don't teach it. I'm 34 and didn't learn about it at school. Learned about the Roman Empire, Egypt, World Wars I and II and about the British Empire. Mainly Africa and Australia. They mention the War of Independence but that's about the extent of it. I'm 2 years older, and considering I took history for GCSE, I learned far more history after leaving school. The curriculum never seemed to go deep into the stuff we did. 134 comments as of the time I write this, no one has mentioned that the word is taught. I'm sorry op. I couldn't not. Please forgive me. That's what I thought. They either don't or I didn't pay attention. Probably both, to be honest. Most likely. Reading some of the comments on here, I think people need to understand that Britain has history going back millennia, while America has history that goes back a few hundred years. Other than the Civil War and American Revolution, there hasn't really been anything else in American history that is comparable to hundreds of wars/battles in British history, whether internationally or domestic. So, for America, these two events are massive, while they pale into insignificance in the UK. Even WW2 had a lot more happening in the UK than in the US, who joined the effort later. America didn't experience the Blitz, the rationing or the evacuation of children from urban areas, for example. Nor did America have to rebuild cities and infrastructure, or deal with a whole generation of men wiped out or damaged by the war on the same scale as the UK. Other than troops deploying to Europe, life mostly continued as normal in America. Edit. Wow, did not expect my comment to get this reaction. Thanks to the 2 people who gave me gold and silver. Just want to take this opportunity to explain what I meant when comparing UK and USA losses, as some have taken my comment as belittling the USA losses, which wasn't my intention. It is relative to population percentage as a reflection of the impact it has on the country. WW2. The UK had a population of 46 million and lost approximately 450,000, and the USA had a population of 132 million and lost approx 415,000. Given that America's population was 3 times the size of the UK's population, the loss was more impactful to the country, but no less to individual families. This is also following WW1 in the previous generation, where the UK lost approximately 900,000. 2% of population, and the USA lost 120,000, 0.1% of population. I remember hearing someone say 100 miles is a long way to a Brit and 100 years is a long time to an American. That just about sums this up. My house is 140 years old. Fuck ever driving 140 miles. Exactly this. Although to the Americans, the revolution is extremely important and the founding of their nation, in British history it's just a footnote. The war itself was just seen as a part of the larger war with France. France backed the fledgling USA, trying to distract Britain from the war in Europe. Britain had to invest more heavily in North America than the French did, so it was a worthwhile distraction. The fact that the USA won was a bit of a surprise, to both the French and the British. I don't think that's accurate. The French didn't even join the war until the Americans had the upper hand after Saratoga in 1777, over 6,000 British soldiers captured. This effectively liberated New England, and by the time the French actually arrived in numbers, Cornwallis was defeated. The French army and navy turned it into a certain and final defeat, but it's hard to see any path to victory for the British after 1777. Yeah, when narrowly looking at troop involvement you are right. But the French were covertly supporting the Americans before that. Pretty sure the French supplied nearly all the gunpowder in the early part of the Revolution. Had the British not been concentrated on the French, though, the Revolution wouldn't have even made it to 1777. Most of their military was focused on the French and had been for decades. Had that threat not been taking up so much of their focus, Saratoga goes very differently. The French had also been supplying the Continental Army since 1775. The French were the Americans' primary suppliers since 1775, they only joined officially in 1778, but we're heavily supporting for years. Didn't even join is disingenuous, without that help no one knows what would have happened. ITT people act surprised their primary school history courses focus on their home country. It wasn't. In the UK you learn about your own stuff. Scotland get William Wallace at sea, England gets the Tudors and royal family. Then they just hit you with WW2. Except for Wales. Wales also gets England. Us Americans, how is British history taught in US schools? US schools are locally controlled, so you can find all kinds of things. In general, US students are taught lots of US history, which includes British history for background and is then intertwined from Jamestown until 1776. They are also taught a generally Eurocentric and English-centric version of world history. They are also taught a generally Eurocentric and English-centric version of world history. This has been exactly my experience, both in school and in people's general knowledge of history. American prehistory is European history. That's where we, the vast majority of contemporary Americans, trace our ancestry. It was taught a lot and it was taught fairly. I don't know if taking world history in community college counts, but we got taught about King Henry VIII, the English Civil War, etc. We got taught a lot about the US Revolutionary War in elementary school, and I really don't remember them making the British look really evil. The US Civil War and the Confederacy, however, they made them out to be the literal spawn of Satan, and the ironic part is that I was born and raised in Virginia, where the capital of the Confederacy was. Edit. I just want to mention that I was born and raised in Northern Virginia, close to Washington, D.C., so it was a fairly liberal area, but a lot of conservatives as well. Edit 2. I also forgot to add that we learned tons and tons of European history during the Age of Exploration, 1600 and to 1700 and especially about Jamestown, Plymouth, John Rolfe, John Smith, the Spanish Armada, etc. Most of British history we learned was definitely in the Age of Exploration. Grew up in Texas, got a lot of British history in our American, world history, and modern Euro classes. Keep in mind that before 1776, British history was American history too. Generally it starts with 1066 though, and then a lot of emphasis on the Magna Carta. We don't get a lot of history around Alfred the Great or Boudicca or anything like that. I read somewhere that the Magna Carta is a bigger deal in America than in the UK. Is that true? It's a really big deal here, seen as a precursor to our own written constitution. King Henry VIII. Oh, our history has such a hard-on about this guy. I remember spending whole years in primary school studying him and the Tudors, which is hilarious once I'd studied international history later on. The trouble with being a former great power is that we seem to think that parochial little Tudor despots are somehow important, when compared to the Holy Roman Empire, for instance. And then we get self-loving, self-aggrandizing Tudor historians coming on TV and explaining modern social issues as if they have a fucking clue. Looking at you, Starkey. /rant. In the IITs, in our public, free, schools, it was pretty well covered in a variety of classes in the advanced classes: language arts, art, history, Latin. Hadrian's Wall, Ladisfer, Daygold, Corsa, Magna Carta, Henry VIII. War of the Roses. A Man for All Seasons. A whole year of English Lit, focused on Shakespeare and Bronte. King's List. Roundheads. Nelson. Opium Wars. Hong Kong. The Boer War. World War II. That's legitimately a more comprehensive list than we learn. We learn a shit ton of British history. We have some years of American history, and some years of world history, and world history is like 90% British history. Lol.